I worked in an exotics-only practice in Northern Virginia, and I also worked in a busy cat and dog practice, and I have handled thousands of animals and worked with many clients and many veterinarians. Before starting my career in veterinary medicine, I had completed a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Virginia, which is a highly respected psychology department where a lot of great psychology research has been done. And I, during my bachelor's degree, learned about the field of psychology called behaviorism and learning theory. And in my learning course, we discussed animal training, and I will talk more about that in more detail later. I also studied neuroscience and was able to dissect the brains of rabbits and dogs and to see what a dog's brain actually looks like and touch it, and learned a lot about the different areas of the brain and what processing goes on in each area and how the nervous system works. I also learned about cognition and emotions and personality and theories of psychotherapy, including treatments for phobias and family therapies, which are systems approaches to behavior, looking at interactions between different individuals and how that creates a feedback loop. And so I have a lot of background in psychology, and I adopted a dog right after I graduated. I got married, I got a dog, and my dog had a bunch of behavioral issues, which I started to treat using what I had learned in my learning theories class in psychology. And then I also took him to different trainers and sort of got really interested in working with him to rehabilitate him behaviorally. And then I saw a lot of patients come to us in the veterinary hospital with different issues that we tried to treat. We would do diagnostic tests to see if it was a medical issue, and the test would be negative, and we would end up realizing that the reason the animal was coming to us, it was actually a behavioral issue and not a medical issue, and we couldn't treat it medically. And examples of those cases include feather-picking parrots. Sometimes feather-picking can be caused by medical issues, so we would do all the diagnostic tests, but often they would come back negative, and then it was my job to have the conversation with the owner and tell them that the results of the tests were negative, and that the issue was behavioral and not medical, so we would want to refer them to a behaviorist. But at the time, we didn't have a good animal behaviorist to refer our clients to, so that was frustrating. I have realized and found out that veterinarians don't receive much training in animal behavior during their veterinary degrees. Even at the Dick School of Veterinary Studies, where I did my master's degree in animal behavior and where a lot of really cutting-edge, impressive animal behavior research is happening, the veterinary students only spend a very short time studying animal behavior, and most of my classmates were veterinarians themselves who wanted to learn more about animal behavior, so had continued on to do the master's degree. And other examples of cases that we saw when I was working in veterinary medicine were dogs who would obsessively lick their usually front legs and cause what's called a lick granuloma, an irritated area of the skin, and they can cause pretty serious, sometimes it's just a bare patch of skin where the fur has been removed due to the repetitive licking, or there can be wounds caused by the licking, and you'll, as a veterinarian, would probably do different diagnostic tests to check for skin allergies, because it can, they could have itchy skin, they could have allergies, or, it could be behavioral. Self-directed repetitive behaviors like feather picking and that licking that causes the lick granulomas are often abnormal behaviors, which can be the result of stress and anxiety and an inappropriate environment. I have, in addition to doing my master's degree, I have done a course in applied behavior analysis, which helps me assess the behavior. That was taught by Dr. Susan Friedman, who is a psychologist who is now a parrot trainer and teaches animal behavior classes. So I took her Living and Learning with Animals course for professionals, and that was mostly dog and horse trainers and some parrot trainers who wanted to learn newer scientific techniques to train animals, but I was there as a veterinary professional. And applied behavior analysis I'll talk about a little bit more later as well, but that is a way of analyzing the behavior. Then I have attended a lecture with Dr. Scott Eccles, who is an avian specialist. He's a veterinarian, and he talks and has done a lot of work on environmental enrichment. So environmental enrichment is a process to allow captive animals to express natural behaviors in an unnatural environment. As an ethologist, so I have my degree in applied animal behavior. Applied animal behavior is also called ethology, and that is just the study of animal behavior, and that includes observing animals in the wild and also doing experiments to assess the purpose and function of the behaviors that we see them do in the wild. And then I can use information about the natural behavior of animals in the wild to help me design enrichment devices or the environmental enrichment in the home or in a zoo setting. I did projects at the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland's Edinburgh Zoo and Highland Wildlife Park with the squirrel monkeys and the tigers, and to give advice to the zookeepers about ways to improve the well-being of those animals. And I attended lectures also during the master's degree from Graham Law, who is an expert in environmental enrichment, and my own dissertation research was on environmental enrichment. So I engineer and design ways for animals to be able to express natural behavior in captivity. So a lot of my clients are people who are living in apartments and have maybe a border collie, a dog that then is having some behavioral problems, and they've called me. And one of the first things that I'll discuss with my client is the natural behaviors of a dog. And in the wild, wolves and dogs would spend a lot of time hunting and searching for food and foraging. So wolves and dogs can go and sniff fresh berries, and they can smell which berries are ripe and which are not ripe yet. And then they can very carefully pick only the ripe berries with their little teeth, and they very carefully lift their lips so that their lips don't get prickled if this is a blackberry bush. And they can very carefully, rotate their head and position it, and then bite the berry off of the bush and eat the berry. And then they'll, sniff and go on to the next berry at a different angle and a different height. And they, will spend a lot of time foraging for food. Then, of course, they also go hunting. So they'll, spend time chasing the animal and then catching the animal and biting down, and then after they've killed the animal, they'll carefully pluck out the fur and pull off the skin, and then chew and eat the meat and eventually chew on the bones. And that whole process takes a lot of time. Plus, they're living in social groups, so there's other canines interacting with them, and they're navigating the social relationships and family relationships. And finally, they're spending a lot of time walking. And sometimes there's, and then a little bit more recently, but still many thousands of years ago, we started breeding dogs for more specific behaviors. Like we bred terriers to hunt rats, and terriers have been bred for many, many generations to be really great rat hunters. And so a terrier will want to, stick its head down a hole and hunt a rat, and they will love to chase fast-moving small objects. And your border collies have been bred for thousands of years to actually maintain a wolf behavior that is staring really intensely, and it's a predatorial behavior that becomes herding the livestock. And border collies still today herd sheep, and I have spent a lot of time on the border where the border collie is from, in between England and Wales, and spent a lot of time on Welsh sheep farms where the farmer is out training the border collie all day in the hills, and these are thousands of acres and hilly terrain, and you have thousands of sheep, and the border collie is running up and down the hills all day, often in the rain and wind, and working and being trained constantly and herding the sheep. And I've had the pleasure of watching the sheepdog trials and seeing really expert sheepdog trainers and handlers doing the sheepdog trials and seeing all of those behaviors that the border collie does. I've also spent time around working retrievers, and in England, seeing how the Labrador retriever will run up and flush the bird out of the bush, and then the bird will be shot, and the Labrador retriever will run up and grab the bird, retrieve it, carry it back to the owner. And that involves a lot of walking as they go out on the hunt, and then running with the bird and thinking about, retrieving just the bird and giving it back to the owner. And a lot of time outside with the owner. Then you have, and I've also seen Jack Russells hunting rats in a barn, and they're, going in between the hay bales and grabbing the rat, and it's a lot of very important behaviors that we have bred these dogs to do. And nowadays, all of a sudden, we're keeping these dogs in apartments or inside the house while we go out to work for 8 hours a day. And the same with cats. We have cats became our companions because we started growing grain. And we used to eat acorns and make flour out of acorns, but then we started growing grain and making flour out of grain. So when we were growing and storing our grain, there were mice that were attracted to eating the grain. And cats started coming and eating the mice. And so the cats would be outside hunting the mice, and we liked that, they kept the mice down so that the mice weren't eating our grain. And eventually we started probably feeding the cats, and we became very, very fond of cats. And now cats are living indoors more often, which is really good for our wild birds. And I'm very passionate about bird conservation. I'm probably the only person who has attended both the North American Spay-Neuter Conference and the North American Ornithological Conference, because I really love cats and I really love birds, and I really think it is important to protect our wild birds. But keeping cats indoors away from wild birds can cause cats to have behavioral problems.